I think we've got 18 participants. I think I'm just going to kick off just for time's sake. So, yeah. Today, Current is very delighted to welcome Chloe Loh to our digital podium. Chloe is a graduate of the UCD Masters of Architecture. I think she studied her undergraduate degree in the UK, but then came over here. She's worked in numerous architectural practices, O'Donnell and Toomey, David Cohn, and Eric Perry Architects, just to name a few. More recently, she's worked with the Architecture Foundation as an assistant curator, and currently she's the public program manager for the RIBA. Her presentation today is going to be about a project, a student project that she organized when she was still here in UCD back in 2018, called Gender and Architectural Agenda. I suppose the title of that project sort of speaks for itself, so I won't say too much more about that. Just before I hand over to Chloe, I think she's going to speak for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll be soliciting responses from students, trying to get a sort of student conversation going about topics like activism and feminism, etc. I suppose with that, Chloe, please take it away.
Hi, yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. It's been, over the past few weeks, I've sort of had various reasons to relook at this project. And it's been quite nice to reevaluate and remind myself of what we did, how, where, and why and when. So it's been a really nice thing to do. So I'm not going to talk too much about the content of this project in terms of the specific areas it focused on in terms of activism or sort of polemic, but I will be phrasing it more as sort of how we organized ourselves and what we did, with a view to maybe talking about other student-led projects that might happen in the future. So this wanted to start, this was a group project. Yeah, we all worked together to do this, and it was a group of staff, students across multiple years, and also actually in the end across universities. So she's not in this photo, but a student from NCAD helped us do all the graphic design as part of her visual communications thesis project. And that was a really nice collaboration. So this is my hint to play. So Owen in the call, who actually was the one who invited me, so I think he's sort of on the sort of curatorial group for this program, made a film, sort of his piece for this, and it may be quite a good summary. It's not too long. I'm not sure if it has any sound actually, so it doesn't have any sound, but I'll just leave you to sort of read through this, and it's just a nice sort of run through of some of the things that we did, especially for the exhibition at the end. So the project was culminated in a series of lunchtime talks and a roving exhibition, which moved from UCD to, well, across UCD, so in the Department of Architecture. Yeah, so it moved from UCD's architecture department to main campus as part of UCD Festival, and then also to the RAI. And so that film there just sort of focused more on the last few weeks of production, and I guess the group who were in second year at the time making the exhibition, making their exhibits, and opening the show. So this, I just put together, the focus of this talk is just going to be on this process from the beginning through to the end. And so I put together this sort of diagram to sort of explain this process, and I'll just walk through it quickly now. So it began sort of, I guess, 6 months before it started as gender and architectural gender. And I was in, I guess, 4th year. And I think I was quite driven. Like, I think I'd come back after first semester, and there'd been all these women-led protests in the US at the inauguration of Trump. And I felt sort of driven by that. I felt the energy come over, and I was like, well, let's do something. Nothing was happening, I felt, on campus to do with the issue, which I thought was really important, thinking about women in architecture. And I didn't see it represented in the curriculum, so I thought I'll just do it myself. And the first thing I did to sort of see if anyone else was interested was to put posters up around the university anonymously. And I put up a series each week. And the idea behind the posters was just to fill in the gaps. So I felt like the precedents that we were being given in the studio weren't representative of the broad range of architectural approaches or genders in architecture. And also that there was some, resources that weren't being used. So there was a section of the library which I discovered on feminist history, which didn't really see in anyone's reading list, didn't even know if anyone knew that it was there. So it was more like that. And then they sort of generated interest. And then after a sort of few weeks, I could hear staff and students sort of intrigued as to who it was. And in the end, we decided that it was best to just sort of, if there was enough interest, to do something about it. And so over the summer then, I organised non-anonymously an event to sort of open the September term in. So then that's September of my 5th year. And that was a panel discussion. At the moment, this talk was still framed around women in and architecture. And we had Sheila O'Donnell was chairing it. We had Mary McAuliffe from the Women's Studies Department at UCD, Tara Kennedy, and others from non-UCD, just sort of give different perspectives. And that was supposed to be more like a forum, a place for discussion, open debate. And it was just conceived as a one-off event. And really, I guess in the project, it was more a way of gathering momentum, doing something, and then sort of seeing what came from it. And from that event, there was more staff buy-in about what this project could be. And I was encouraged to then seek funding to sort of continue the project more formally. And I applied for Spark funding at UCD, which I got. And actually the process of doing the Spark funding made you put together a proper plan, strategy, and pull together a team and sort of set yourself, I guess, targets and deliverables, and assess how much money or support you might need to do that. And that was a really helpful process. And actually the Spark funding also comes with support from the careers department about planning things. So it's quite nice to have that. And also putting together a team. So if you make this sort of series of targets that you want to achieve, you have to sort of amass a small team. And I thought it was really important. So at the moment, it was sort of more of a 5th year discussion. And we were a very small group of 20. And so even then it was just a sort of 6 of us in that year talking about this, and who organised that Women in and Architecture Forum event. And I felt it was important that it wasn't just a 5th year discussion, and that we wanted to extend it across the school. And I felt that 3rd years might feel very, very busy and overwhelmed, and 1st years maybe were a bit young to maybe, I don't know, want to embrace this in a way. And so I approached 2nd year as the year that I thought would be the best to sort of complement the 5th year's input. And so we amassed this team of lovely 2nd years and 5th years, and we worked quite nicely across years. And I felt like it was a good way of sort of bridging that 4th year, 5th year building and Richview building divide as well across the quad. And so then the things that we organised with this funding and team were, I can't remember how many talks now over the beginning of the 2nd semester. And Kathleen James Chakraborty from the History of Art department, again, not on our campus, came over to deliver quite a lot of these based on her sort of research in 20th century architecture. And those are really fascinating. I mean, she pointed out so many women in the lives of famous architects. So we look at Frank Lloyd Wright, Zaha Hadid, Jane Drew, and just really opened my mind to what we could do. And I guess that was the point of these talks, is that, like the posters, they were there to fill in gaps in our curriculum or education that we didn't have available to us. And we also the posters that we used to promote these talks were a platform for student creativity. So that's sort of another thread to this, is that yes, we learned stuff from doing this, but also we use it as a platform just to be creative. So make posters, make exhibitions, a different platform to studio. And then the exhibition used a number of books that have been published about feminism and architecture, which we brought into the library with our funding, and hopefully are still there. and yeah, so we read those together to discuss them in sort of groups, but also one-to-one. And from those books, the people who chose to exhibit in the exhibition chose one essay or chapter to frame their piece around. And so it was sort of like a mini brief, approach it like a studio project. Maybe you get something, you respond to it and you create something, but it was quite lighthearted. And I really encourage people to think about non-architectural means of representation. So it was sort of a parallel way of using your brain. And Kevin designed the exhibition, and Kira Reddy, I don't know if he's still at UCD, was helping us with that. And the exhibition had to be able to be set up and set down because it was moving. It had to be within the budget, and had to have ways of representing objects and flat images because of the work that students were designing. And well, anyway, the video shows how we made that, and it was quite a complex piece. It was fun to do, and it went up in 3 different places, driven around by various people, and yeah, and then we produced and delivered this exhibition, and that's sort of where this project ended. I had to produce a small report for the Spark group, but it sort of had this big climax and then just sort of stopped. In this project stopped in a way. I moved back to England. People graduated, and it sort of came to a pause. But I hope there's sort of different legacies of the project, which maybe I'd like to hear from you guys about the students who are involved, what you've done now, whether it's changed the way that you think about architectural, and also students at UCD, whether there's more interest in doing student-led things, more confidence, and or more of a desire, and also from the staff as well. I think I hope that there was some sort of precedent set, I guess, for supporting student projects. I mean, Samantha, who couldn't make it today, was a huge help to me throughout this project. And oh, there's more slides. So this was, let me just, before I get to the sort of people who were supporting, I wanted to just take a moment actually to go through and just celebrate some of the things that we created from this as a group. So it wasn't just the talks, it wasn't just the exhibition, it was the things that were created throughout. So Daisy, who was the year above me and had graduated by this point, is an amazing illustrator, and we asked her to make some of the posters for us. Nicola made one, Nicholas made another, and then here's the work from the NCAD student Sarah, whose thesis was on women in architecture, coincidentally. And so working with us on this project helped her to develop objects for her thesis. So she made this banner, she made these objects, she made our leaflets, our posters, and they were all part of her final project. So we sort of generated work together. Sai did this lino print, Nicholas is fantastic, oil painting, Alana submitted an essay. So all these different media. Ash made her plaster sculpture. I don't know what you'd call David's. It was a mixture of things. It was a beautiful drawing and object. And Nicola's collective group, and don't have a photo of Laura's. I looked everywhere, couldn't find it. And then we also made these leaflets that went around for promotion. And again, we used the inside of those. So they opened out to a poster. Nicholas had one, Ailish I see on the call, Aoife. And then here was that final poster that Sarah did of the project. And then here, so yeah, it was a group project. I sort of conceived at the beginning and led, but couldn't have done it without staff support, student support, and also just some of the collaborators we had. So the RIAI, the Careers Department, Spark. I mean, this is the list here. And yeah, it was a group collective effort. collective project, and that's how I see it. And I would love today to hear from those of you in the Zoom space, because I have my experience of being involved in it, and like I can remember my memories of why I did certain things, but everyone will have different memories or experiences and reasons. So I'll leave it there.
That's perfect, Chloe. Thank you very much for offering sort of an overview, and I suppose if we can use this as a springboard to jump into a bit of student conversation, I think I'm with Chloe. It would be really interesting to hear from some of the fourth year UCD students now that were in second year when they were working on this project. I don't know who would like to go in first. I'm told Nicola Kenny is a good one for the chat.
Stop it. No, I just remember, I suppose, my experience. I remember I was at the open day for architecture, and I was having a really interesting discussion with an NCAD student, and I think Chloe was talking to them, and I was like, this girl is so interesting. You were talking on about like feminism and different ideas, and I was really engaged because I suppose up until that point in architecture, sometimes I suppose education could feel a bit flat, and like, you know, I suppose we're in the age of groups like Assemble, and I was really interested in collective projects and people doing alternative things with architecture. And I just thought, I remember Chloe was describing, you were kind of trying to get this project going and you're interested in doing something. I remember being so interested in that because it was a platform to do something different. And as time went on, we kind of it was really interesting how it evolved. A discussion happened, and as you said, it kind of grew into this collective experience where we were all collaborating and doing things together and feeding in inspiration, and there was opportunities to practice skills and to do things and to make stuff. And I suppose it was just a really good outlet to apply the skills we learned. And it's really interesting, you summarizing there, you can see the kind of connection that can be made between what we were all learning in architecture school and making an exhibition. I thought that was really amazing, and it was just a really exciting project to be involved in, and I loved working with different people, and I learned so much that I still apply to different projects. I don't do architecture anymore, but I apply a lot of those things from that I learned. And then another really interesting thing is that after Chloe left, I think groups like Zoomcast were sort of, so after you left, Chloe, they ran the Student Curators Project, and I think UCD was really interested in developing more student-led groups and student-led activities. So that was really cool to see how UCD was embracing that. And, you know, it was all about students creating exhibitions and students responding to what was happening in the world. So I think it definitely had a legacy. And even now we're on Zoomcast, and it's funny because some things started off with somebody putting up anonymous posters, but actually it has brought us all together even today. And I suppose that collective energy is really lovely.
So I think I think an interesting question for Chloe maybe would be how is the legacy for this of this, like how is it sort of shaped you in a sense, because like you graduated very quickly after, or like sort of almost your graduation was like the concluding point for this project. And as we do sort of have a legacy of it in UCD. Like I'm only in second year, but I remember like last year when we were actually still on campus a lot, like the posters from Gender and Architectural Agenda, like they're still up around Ridgeview. I think there's a couple wild ones there somewhere. But how has it sort of shaped you?
Yeah, I guess first point that I regretted how it came to an end because I left. That it would have been better to have framed the, I guess, organization in a way that didn't mean that had to happen. I mean, really, it was transportable. So we left the books, we left the exhibition and the art pieces in the workshop, and there was a hope that it could go to other places and grow because it was a module. So the tables could be made again. Other schools could make their own things, and it could have done that. I didn't have the ability to stay and do that, but you know, that could have happened. that in terms of how it's affected me, I think that was my first thinking into women in architecture. And I mean, there had been a lunchtime talk before this in my 4th year, and one of the questions from the students had been about, I think it was about the Irish architects who'd gone to the Biennale in Chicago, and it was mentioned, it was a comment that out of the group of sort of 10, only 2 women, and she was mentioning that, well, in the sort of Group 91 era, that balance was always there, and it was sort of in the next generation after that where the balance had sort of fallen. And I'd never really thought about myself as a woman or a female in architecture, and I just sort of thought, well, if I just work really hard and I'm the best candidate, I'll get the job. And I remember having this interesting conversation with Nuala, who I don't know if she still teaches, Nuala Flood, and I think she's at Queen's now, and she sort of mentioned it to me and was like, well, we just had a conversation, and it got me thinking, actually, you know what, like, just because I can't say it doesn't exist in my life, therefore it doesn't exist. And I sort of started noticing other things, and then, as I say, over that Christmas, the 2016 protests happened, and it sort of got me thinking differently. And I think since then, thinking about diversity in architecture is so on my mind. It has obviously become a much bigger conversation, especially this summer. Mm-hmm. And in my job, I program RIBA's public events, and we do have, I in my professional capacity, I think about diversity in architecture all the time, and the platform and the power that I have to be representative in my talks. So yes, I think it sort of has that legacy there.
You mentioned a sort of frustration, the fact that like all of this stuff was happening in the US with the protests, and nobody was doing about it, and that was the sort of spur for you to do that. Do you think like you were sort of unique in that sense? Not unique, but like, do you think because you did your undergrad in the UK, like, do you feel like that put you in a position where you were more interested to do activism or to organize a project like this, like, or?
Oh, I mean, I can't speak to whether it was my UK studying. I just, I like being busy. I like having multiple projects on the go. I've always been like that. So all through my undergrad, I was doing sport at university level and volunteering in other like capacities. And I think at UCD, because I'd moved countries, I sort of lost all my groups and connections. And so I wanted to make my own, I guess. And yeah, I also sort of, after graduating from undergrad and going into the part 1 experiences, I realized the amazing platform that university gives you to organize things or get involved, which it's so much harder to do when you're working, because you don't have a venue, you don't have funding, and you're working like 9 to 6 or whatever it is. And so I was very aware in my master's that I wanted to make things happen alongside studio, because we had the funding, we had the staff support, we had venues, and speakers are much more likely to respond positively to invites from students than a random person working in a practice in London.
I was preparing for this, because like I'd known gender and architectural gender was a thing, but I'd never really looked into it. And Owen sort of put me onto the YouTube videos that are on the UCD Architecture YouTube channel. But I was surprised, for one, that they actually have so few views. Like, I think there was only 100 views on the one with Mark Price called Gender, Architecture and the Dominant Culture. But I thought like that one really went into interesting things, because it started out as a conversation about feminism, and then it quickly turned into analyzing the power structures that exist within architectural education. And I suppose beyond the feminism, do you feel like this project actually has had a legacy within the sphere of architectural education, like us questioning the way we're educated? Like, I think, for one, the stuff that was happening last year with the rethinking of the crit, I don't know if it was directly related or as a direct result of this, but I think, I don't know, maybe you could comment on that.
I don't know about the legacy of this project to education. I mean, this project is such a small dot in the much wider conversation that is, that goes on in the world of educators about curriculum and changing things. And I think this, again, like your first question, I think maybe all of us are able to think more intersectionally about power relations. I mean, I don't think at the time I would have conceived of this project as being to do with power or power relations or power structures. Mark and Ruth's lecture did tap into that, but I don't think at that time I properly understood what that meant. And I do a bit more now. It comes into our work a bit more, and things we're hopefully planning for next year. And I just did a talk series actually all about power structures in the plan with the architect Charles Holland. And we haven't published those yet, but they will be up soon.
Yeah, I think it would actually be really interesting to hear from students on that question, both from students within UCD, but also I see some UCC students and a singular UL student in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute themselves to jump in and add something, I can see Owen's unmuted himself there.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, like, in reference to that particular talk between Mark Price and Ruth Morrow, that probably, see, I was just in second year, it probably was the first talk or anything I'd ever been exposed to that was, the theme of it was basically questioning the whole structure of architecture, the whole structure of crits and stuff, and just the things that we were just all kind of taking part in blindly. And I found that one really really interesting and inspiring, really. And I don't know what was happening last year in the school with that rethinking the crit thing, because I was on my year out. But I would say that was the first time, or one of the first times anyway, I saw Mark talking about it. I know he's probably one of the people who was most involved in that conversation in UCD, if I'm right. Then again, I wasn't there, Steph. So jump in and let me know if I'm just
I unfortunately also didn't have I didn't go to experience it last year, because like I was in first year last year and I was like drowning with not knowing what the hell I was doing in architecture school. But I think like from the bit of reading that I was doing last night, Mark seemed to be the one that actually sort of represented UCD at the symposium in TU Dublin, and it's kind of unfortunate actually that there's no TU. It doesn't appear that there's any TU Dublin students on the call, because
DIT, is that the same? Is that what DIT is?
Yeah,
changed?
DIT.
Yeah, they've changed it to TU Dublin.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that conversation about the crit, so yes, Mark was the biggest proponent of that, but it's a conversation that way predated this project and will continue both in Ireland and beyond. But I know that there was someone in DITT who was really leading on that in terms of like a research capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Jeremy Till in the UK has said a lot about crits in the past.
Mm-hmm. I see Ash from UCD has unmuted themselves.
No, I was just going to add a note on that particular talk. Yeah, it was kind of the rethinking kind of just started when I was in second year, and they were and so we're kind of bringing that in. And the conversation itself was almost anti-crit in its setup, that Mark positioned himself like halfway in the room and he had everyone kind of sit in a circle, a semicircle around him. So he wasn't a speaker as such, he was just part of a discussion. And I think it was really, really successful in that people, students and staff, but mainly students from every year, all kind of put up their hand and had something to say. And I think it was really important to have like first years coming into UCD and to have them exposed to that, to kind of set a precedent that the crit isn't, this is just talking about the crit, but the crit isn't just the only way to teach, and it's not like, it is okay to question these things. It's okay to have discussing other ways to look at work and to discuss topics. And yeah, I just thought that was like a really successful way of doing it, and it definitely had really good involvement and engagement from all years.
I have a point to make about that. It's that I would agree with Chloe that obviously it's a part of a much larger picture, but what I would say about the project is that you could kind of situate it in a sort of movement that seems to be happening where people are involved as Assemble, for instance, in like multidisciplinary collectives, you know, working across different fields and taking on projects and doing things that are about making things happen, I suppose. So I think from that point of view, that definitely without a doubt has had a legacy in UCD, that there is more seemingly a culture of student activism, doing things, making things, getting involved, and I suppose, making projects happen, which is a really exciting part of the project. So I would say it has some legacy in that regard.
I see Niamh Hurley from UCC has unmuted yourself.
I think what it's made me realize, probably very echoey in here, is that the idea of collaborating as architecture schools is really important, because without even the Zoom calls we have or recordings on YouTube, you don't kind of get to translate these conversations between each other, and ultimately we're going to probably end up working together because we move around, we all receive pretty much the same education, so it's kind of good to bring about those ideas between colleges.
Yeah, that's one of the things actually, I was saying at the last one of these, we also, last week we had a couple of students on talking about their experience of IASA, and that whole idea of sharing a culture across architecture schools in Ireland, or not in Ireland, sorry, in Europe. And it's like we seem to forget that architecture schools in Ireland are not a homogenous thing. Like Irish architecture is completely, I suppose, fragmented in a way. Like we have 7 or 8 schools on the island, and they all have, I imagine, vastly different teaching sort of styles. I mean, there's probably similarities, but there's definitely differences. Niamh, I suppose a question for you, how do you feel, do you think student activism and stuff like that is big in UCC or CCIE? Has there been any parallels?
I think, well, one thing, we're separated from UCC. We're actually a joint course between UCC and CIT. So we share lectures between both colleges, but we're situated off of both campuses. So we're pretty much in our own building, kind of based in Cork City. In regards to student activism, I think it could be more, we could be more involved. I think in previous years, there's probably been collaboration with art colleges around, but particularly with what's happening right now, I think it is opening up that conversation of, I suppose, needing to do something and needing to partake. And it's a conversation that needs to happen, because I don't think it's happening at the moment. Obviously, we have found that there is a good topic of debate of what happens in Cork. We have our own issues. We do get involved in very local issues like Safe Cork City. We've had lecturers talk to us about, I suppose, the implications of what's happening. That's what's been put through by the OPW, and we have got involved in that. But I think collectively with a housing crisis, it's a huge thing that you probably also are very familiar with.
Yeah.
But it's definitely become a really big thing here, and we're trying to get involved in a lot of those things, but I don't think there's as big of a voice as there could be. And hopefully it's kind of saying doing all these online things, hopefully that'll kind of get people to talk more about it, and share ideas across counties, because we very much have the same issues, we just don't talk enough, and I think communication is a big thing here. It needs to happen.
I think it's interesting because it's like we're thinking almost the way that you're speaking is like student voices only exist outside of the classroom, and it's I guess I'm wondering, do you feel and this is an open question, anybody can really answer this, but do you feel politics and sort of the political, political agendas, but these ideas that like the rethinking the crit stuff, or this gender and architectural agenda, do you think that permeates into your studio work and your work in studio? I suppose I'll invite anybody to answer that one. That's sort of on the back of, I mentioned before we kicked off, Hugh Campbell, who's our head of school, mentioned to us at one point that one of the external examiners in UCD made an observation that student work in Ireland is not necessarily as politically driven as it would be in the UK. And I wonder if anybody would like to comment on that.
I'm probably going to comment straight after. It was actually, yeah.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
It was something that was brought up to us actually last year so I'm in fourth year and my final year in Cork. And so in third year, we were looking at the structure of the school system. And so there was the conversation of the politics behind the current primary school education. And one of our lecturers was like, we want you to be political here. We want you to challenge the kind of guidelines we set out for you for, I suppose, the regulations of the school. Like, why does it have to be like this? We want you to answer these questions and ask them and change your viewpoint and like those kind of things. So I think for me, that's when I suppose I got more political with my work, because I've always had that interest in politics and architecture, but sometimes I think it stems from maybe not doing it as much in secondary school, that you kind of go straight into college and you have this whole regimented system that you almost take that on, rather than being like, okay, you know what, I'm going to get involved in other things. I'm going to get more political. And it is through like joining other societies and things like that, I think, is a main thing. But sometimes those aren't encouraged when you're have to spend all time in studio. So
yeah,
there needs to be there needs to be a balance.
Yeah, for certain. Like, I think people can sometimes feel like, I want to get involved with things, but then they feel like they can't because then the studio work will suffer. And I suppose this whole culture that exists within architectural education of you have to put everything into your work, and the whole not being able to sort of switch off at 6 o'clock or you know, working all-nighters and shit. Eilish, you said you were going to come in there. Or Eilish?
Yeah, I kind of have I had the reverse experience of Chloe, because I did my undergrad in UCD and now I'm in the UK. And I don't know if it's like UK specific, but I definitely think part of the reason what you said about like Irish architecture not being that political, maybe it has to do with things like, I mean, even like UCD's location, it's away from like the city and kind of away from like other schools. There's not really much like connection with like other creative courses. And I think, I mean, I'm in like an art school now, so, you know, there's like protests and stuff like that like every week. So I think maybe collaboration is kind of the answer to being more political, especially with like things like NCAD and like IADT and other kind of creative communities.
I think that's a really interesting point, because the campus location of UCD really got to me. And even just in terms of its separation, Richview separation from the rest of campus, and the fact that UCD's architecture school wasn't part of NCAD or Trinity, where all the humanities are, just really bugged me. And I don't know if people know the history of why Richview moved to where it is. I don't know if it's coming up in the sort of, or anything to do with the Belfield 50th anniversary which is happening at the moment, if you can find out about it there. But there was always this rumor that I was told that Richview was moved from being in one of the central squares.
Free Terrace, I think.
Free Terrace.
Because they wanted to stop distracting the students from their course. And so that's an interesting way where architecture then plays a role, like, and has this legacy on us, that like we were placed out in the middle of nowhere to just focus on your studies and have no distractions.
That's a good point about you know, moving the students out because back in that era, it's actually quite well known that there was a lot of student activism in architecture, particularly around saving Georgian buildings and stuff. Like, I'm not sure of the exact timeline and when the School of Architecture moved into Richview, but but that's back around the time when the ESB headquarters was being built on Fitzwilliam Street, which was obviously involved basically the destruction of the longest complete Georgian street in Dublin. at the time, and it's now gone. There's a Grafton Architects project there, but that was a big moment of student activism in architecture that I haven't really heard of much like that since.
I think even within the university, like, I suppose, like, Richview, like you were saying, Richview is isolated both from the city centre and also from Belfield in a way. And I think I noticed that last year because the student council or the student union was organising protests about the rent hikes on UCD. So basically, university management said that they were going to increase the price of student accommodation 12% over the next 3 years, so that by 2022 or whatever, it would be something like 10 grand minimum for a year on UCD. And I noticed it because, like, I'm a class rep and I sit on the union council, and like when they were organizing that protest, one in UCD in general, like, there was pretty poor uptake, but from architecture as well, like, there was 4 people that walked over from Richview to join the protest for an hour, like, and it's not like spiteful or anything. I think it mentions, I don't know, maybe it reveals something about the culture of architecture, like this idea that we can't take breaks and we need to work so hard, or that we just shouldn't be getting involved.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I remember last year in first year when we were in Paul Kennedy's lecture for, I think it was something with environmental things. You remember there was the climate strike, and Paul asked, "Oh, how many people from architecture, like, put up your hands if you went to that strike?" And there was not one single hand that went up into that room. So
yeah, we did a similar thing in studio last year as well, like, because we have studio Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and that climate strike was supposed to be on Friday, and they were like considering cancelling studio, just not doing studio and going to the strike, because they were expecting like every student from UCD to go to that strike, and like very few people actually ended up going. I see Ella from UL there, though. I don't know if you want to offer a UL perspective on this and join in.
Yeah, because I'm in third year, by the way, in UL. So it's our building is right kind of integrated into the campus in UL, because I'm actually originally from Cork, but I chose UL over Cork just because when I was looking at the building, they were in the old building, so it wasn't actually like near enough to the UCC campus. But our building at the moment, like our studio, is right in the middle of UL. It's in one of the main buildings. It's a kind of a studio within. It's not a separate building at all, that's what really appealed to me at the start, because even though we might be kind of isolated in terms of, you know, not going to lecture halls and not being fully integrated with other courses, we still were like right in the center of the campus. But at the moment, there's a plan to move us into the city. I don't really know why, but they want to move us into the city over the next few years. They've taken over a building in the middle of Limerick city centre that they want to completely convert into a architecture school, which hopefully we might not be there. Like, I might be in there by 5th year, but I mean, just sounds like a nightmare to me, like, because it's like we're already kind of integrated in the school now. It's like, okay, well, let's try isolate you completely by putting in the middle of the city centre, where like we have to either commute or try get accommodation nearer to the city. So I don't know, hoping that won't happen by the time I'm still studying, but that's the plan at the moment, is to get us out into the city. So
I think that's interesting. How do you feel like that would affect, because obviously it would be taking you away from the university, but it would be putting you right in the center of like the city. So I mean, like, it's not like they're putting you in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. Like, you're still sort of it's a different kind of central almost.
Yeah, exactly. It probably open a lot more doors in terms of seeing things, and also, you know, even the design school that is in Limerick, LIT, like there could even be some sense of maybe a collaboration with them, because we wouldn't have anything really to do with them either, even though they would, you know, realistically in terms of design, there would be a lot of similarities between them and us. But I suppose if we were in the city, we have gone to the city a few times for projects and whatnot, but we really wouldn't there isn't really much going to the city. But I suppose if we did get out there, even though it might have negatives, it could be a completely different experience altogether, which, I mean, there could be a lot of positives as well to it. So it's kind of just a wait and see thing. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah. I mean, we're kind of the same in UCD. Like, we're supposed to get a new building in the next 4 years or so, but that's actually, it's going to be the opposite. Like, we're going to be right on the center of
Right.
campus.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of changes the dynamic, but the dynamic of how like architecture integrates with the wider university, but also sort of how attitudes change or don't change. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. Somebody want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say I've got sort of 10 minutes left, but you guys, I don't know how you can talk amongst yourselves for longer if you want to. But I guess there's a few topics that have come up here in terms of where issues important to students might be in terms of making better connections between schools, climate change and sustainability, but also like your rights in terms of housing, costs, curriculum, and I guess, what other ideas has anyone in the Zoom space had for things they want to bring up at university or haven't felt the power, like they had the power to, the skills to, or the time to, or what stops you? I mean, you're all talking now over these Zoom rooms and with more digital means now. So I think connectivity could be addressed really soon through like some sort of cross island union of architecture students. In my last role, I tried to instigate something called a mega crit, which was a crit across all schools. So we did them in London a few times, and I tried to instigate it with IAF through and UCD through you guys, and it just didn't really get anywhere. But like those sort of cross crits would be the opportunity to see what like different, and they'd be on theme. So like what housing project in UCD looks like versus CC Cork, Limerick and Queen's as well, or talks and exhibitions, which is the format we took. But like I'm sort of keen to sort of help and use this space to hear your ideas and suggest things if you have.
Yeah, well, I was kind of thinking as well, like for this like this current project. I mean, obviously now we're kind of restricted to Zoom, but I suppose like in a post-COVID world, I think it would be really interesting to sort of keep this idea of connection going, and maybe trying to take this to organize events and stuff like that that do integrate and bring all of the schools together. I suppose to your point of like what do we feel is restriction, like what restrictions, I personally feel like time is a big restriction, and I think like in second year it's much nicer actually, because there's, I suppose it feels like there's a lot less emphasis on just output and it's more emphasis on creativity, and I feel like I've been a lot more able this year to get involved with this and put a lot of my time into this, and also how this sort of feeds my studio projects, and in an ironic sort of turn, it's kind of made things that I'm looking at in my studio project much easier because it really feeds the ideas almost. So I
think
don't
it's
know.
like kind of like especially for us as well, because I think like for us anyway in UL, I don't think compared to the rest of you, like we don't have much connectivity with other schools. Like that's kind of our own fault as well. But like I only got in the society this year just with two other in third year. But I suppose as well it's kind of almost like I'm third year now, there's third year and fifth year is what kind of most of the examiners would grade our school on. So there's obviously this semester is like, especially doing it from home and from, you know, our accommodation stuff, it's like being a super tough semester in terms of just like, probably the rest of you feel as well, it's just like work. There's no kind of give at all this semester. I feel like it's just been constant. So I think even these talks, it's kind of nice to see that, try not to be kind of depressing about it, but there's other kind of people going through it, you know, just to see what, you know what I mean? There's other people suffering away as well that we don't know about, that we don't see. Like, and I'm sure most of you probably feel the same way, and you're probably doing similar projects and you probably have similar, you know, positive and negative experiences with your lecturers. And it's kind of nice. I think even what Chloe was saying about just getting on and we could all, you know, look at each other's work and just talk about what projects you're doing. I know we love to see what kind of work you're doing, just even as terms of, you know, getting ideas and kind of knowing that we're all kind of in it together in some sort of a way.
Yeah. I see Neve has unmuted yourself there again.
Yeah, so I was involved in, like, we've an architecture society here. I think pretty much every school does at this point. It's always like, you know, organizing talks, and I was doing a lot of the organizing of talks last year in particular. So it became a different story, obviously, with the pandemic, but it was almost a better opportunity, which sounds terrible, but it kind of pushed us to go online and to make these connections. And I had our master's coordinator talk to me about what we're doing here at Current, and I was like, oh yeah, this is amazing, because I had this idea over summer of potentially starting a podcast, but it's about obviously finding other students who would be interested in partaking in that. And definitely, I think, like, we've tried over a couple of years to set up a committee with the RAI, and I think, I don't know if anybody was involved, and that was a couple of years ago, and it was about connecting the different schools together, but it was that restriction of travel that became a big issue for any of us down in Cork or UL, because obviously it's a lot easier to, I think, like host it up in Dublin. It is easier, and it's really not a fault on any of the students. It's more so a fault on travel and how it's not exactly great in Ireland.
And how Ireland is structured in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that opens up a big conversation there. But like even last year, I think we had a talk and we had a few UL students come down, and it's so funny because you would nearly consider Limerick and Cork being quite close, but I found we have more connections with UCD than with UL in regards to even lectures. And like, we have Hugh now, he came and he gave a review, well, on Zoom, and I actually think that was almost a good way to connect the schools, was to have the lecturers crit, like from different schools, or come in and even talk to the students about their experience. But I'm like, why can't that happen between students? And maybe it's about doing exhibitions, publications, just showing, I suppose, like different things that we're doing. Like even we're showing some of the student projects that have been going on. Like we have a housing project in second year that ends up being an internship. And like that could be a great model to put in other schools. I'm like, why isn't there that conversation of what we're doing individually and make it a collective thing?
Yeah, I suppose that kind of comes back to like the mega crit sort of thing that Chloe was saying, like this idea of even just, you were saying sharing, Hugh came over to do the crit. It's like, why can't we? Because I know at the end of the year in UCD, normally there's like a big school-wide exhibition of work. And it's like, why can't we do something that's almost like cross-university thing? And maybe instead of it just being a day-long exhibition, it's like a week long.
That's a really good idea.
And you guys can also organise, I mean, what's useful for you? So like maybe not a crit where it's the final show of your work, maybe that's not the most useful thing, but maybe it's like in the development stages, can a few of you in this call, or who do know each other, like it doesn't have to be everyone, it could just be 10 people in a Zoom call, like I've got this, crit tomorrow, I can't figure out this plan, and you guys just screen share and talk through that, and then that can happen, like Zoom, and this is what Neve was saying, the pandemic is awful, but the ability for us to connect so much more easily without having to fly or pay money for flights and carbon emissions and all that means you can talk, you can organize things super quickly, and you can talk across Zoom and share documents and information. And I think you can even can actually even annotate on them and stuff. I organized a talk with Hennigan Peng recently, and Shifu was saying they've been using Zoom for years, and they have been working and using Zoom to mark up drawings, show them to other colleagues across different teams and countries, and they've been they really know how to use Zoom to share and look at work. It's not a hindrance at all. So I think like you guys can be the first sort of student generation to use Zoom in a way that helps you, as opposed to sort of being hindered by everything that's happening so far.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think it'd be really interesting to see going forward, like again in this post-COVID world, like will we continue using Zoom? Because I've seen a lot of discourse, at least among like my dad and working people, that are like, I think we actually did a survey as part of one of our courses to look at indoor environment and stuff, but one of the questions was, do you want to continue working from home in a post-COVID world? And I think like 78% of responses said no, they don't want to continue working from home. And that to me signals that like people are kind of sick of Zoom. So I suppose I wonder, in what sense is Zoom going to stay relevant, or are people going to want to just forget about it and never use it ever again and go by the wayside or whatever.
I think it's different for a studio though. I mean, you guys thrive off working around each other, with each other, showing you guys your drawings and going to get coffee or whatever. And that's quite different to Zoom being around to connect people across countries, time zones, like immediately. You can organize meetings or talks quite quickly. And yeah, I mean, the things that you might normally do in your studio with asking your sort of person sat next to you to look at something or show them something you're making, you've lost that. But you could actually do that with Cork or Limerick. And it's easy for you to organize a conversation with your friend in UCD as it is in another university, and that might help this cross-pollination.
That's true. That's very true. I saw Irene earlier had unmuted themselves to say something. I don't know if they still want to. Oh, you're silent.
Sorry, it's not quite relevant anymore. But actually, for what we were mentioning about having this sort of create or like sharing work with other students, I believe we've been using recently these platform Miro boards. Well, we started using it last year for studio because of the pandemic, and I find it very helpful to share work and be able to like scroll around it and see other people's work. So I think that sort of thing across universities could be very helpful as well, because you don't have a physical exhibition, you have a digital one, and people can access it at any time, any day, and look at everything, and you can even leave notes and comment on other people's work. So I was actually thinking that I'm in third year as well in UCD. I know a couple of people said they were in third year, and I was thinking that could potentially be something that is done with people within the same year in different universities across Ireland to share our work.
Yeah. I think another interesting point about the Miro boards as well, just briefly, I know Hugh has banged down quite a bit about this idea of the chance encounter and how COVID has sort of eliminated that. And he was talking about how maybe there's a way that you can simulate the chance encounter in an online sense. And I sort of disagree with that idea. I don't think you can. But then I noticed a couple of weeks ago, like on Miro, because you can see people's cursors when they're on the board. So like I was in a situation where like I was on the board, I was uploading stuff. It was like 9 o'clock at night, and I saw somebody else. There was like two other people on, and I was like, I just rang one of them on WhatsApp, and it's kind of like the same thing where you have this chance encounter where otherwise you wouldn't have rang this person, but you've run into them in a sort of online corridor almost. Chloe, I'm aware that you probably need to run.
I mean, organize yourselves. Make it like, don't go to the staff until you have something to say. Have a think individually as a group. Make a list of things that you want, how likely they are, what needs to be done. Have an idea about like which are the most priorities, which will help the most number of people, which can be done quickly, which will take more time to plan, and present those to staff. You know, are there members of staff who you already know who are already like helpful students, or do you just go straight to the top? But like, yeah, organize yourselves and ask for help from the staff, and something will come from it.